because I'm about ready to start leveling out this area of my lawn. It's a tiny little area, but roughly parallel to the border between my neighbor's yard and mine. I'm going to be leveling this with a mixture of sand and soil. But when you just say sand leveling on a lawn, lots of questions come up. Which sand do you use? Well, let me go show you. I've got 5 different kinds of sands over by my garage. I want to show you the difference between them all and explain which one we're not going to use and why, and which one I am going to use and why. Now, there are other kinds of sands that you could purchase, but one of the most common ones that people think of is play sand. This I'm not going to be using. This is paver sand. This is also different, and this is also not what I'm going to be using. Now, over at my local Home Depot, I picked up this all-purpose sand. Sometimes you can find all-purpose sand called mason sand. The brand doesn't matter. It's the kind of sand that matters. This is the one that I will be using. Alternatively, you could get plaster sand. You can tell the difference here. Plaster sand is finer in texture, but I'm not going to be using that, and I'll tell you why. Last option that I have here is silver sand, otherwise known as silica sand, easily the finest of them all. I'm not using that. Now, when it comes to putting sand down on the lawn, you don't want the sand to be round. You want the edges to be jagged. And the reason for that is if it's really round, then that means when it's dry, it can literally run off with wind, or if there's a big heavy downpour. When you look at play sand in its dry form, these particles, for the most part, are fairly well rounded, meaning they don't have jagged edges, although you are going to find some that do. You absolutely could put play sand down on the lawn to do lawn leveling, but it's not going to hold its shape good enough. Of the sands that we have here, paver sand is the most obvious choice to not use for lawn leveling. The reason for that is because not only is it sand, look at this, sand looks pretty similar to the all-purpose sand, except for the color. There are additives placed into paver sand so that when it gets wet, it starts caking together. So, considering its texture is very similar to all-purpose sand, otherwise known as masonry sand, this is actually what I'm going to be using. This is coarse. We have a variety of particle sizes. Some of the sizes are small. Some of the sizes are bigger. You've got a lot of texture. And when it is wet, it will hold together and it will dry and it will form a crust, but not a particularly hard crust. But the larger particles are going to allow water to filter through a little bit easier. And because everything has more of a jagged edge appearance to it, it's not going to wash away or blow away or erode as easily. Plaster sand is pretty much like this, except for everything is far more uniform. It's been more heavily processed and screened to give us more uniform size and shape, and it will move around a little bit more. And because everything fits together, this forms a harder crust. That does bring us to the most obvious 5th option, silver sand or quartz sand, otherwise known as silica sand. This stuff has been washed to the point where it's almost pure sand, whereas some of the others over there are more likely to contain slightly higher amounts of silt and clay. So in a real lawn, we don't just have sand. We have sand, we have silt, we have clay, and we have organic matter. Now, I'm going to get the organic matter from my soil, but I can't just run off to the store and buy bags of silt or clay. So because this is going to have the least amount in it, I'm going to go back to the construction sand, the masonry sand, yet again. Although this is cleaned, it's washed, it is coarse, it's got a variety of elements in there, and it's more likely to have a higher concentration of silt, which is going to be great to mix together with my organic matter and then throw it into the lawn. As always, when you're doing any leveling project, you want everything to be super dry when you put it down. It's actually pretty hard to buy sand and soil that's completely dry. So if you find a source that has extremely dry sand, then I don't know, that place is like worth its weight in gold. Pay a premium for that stuff. Right in here, these bags of all-purpose sand, this stuff is wet right out of the bag. This is what it looks like right out of the bag. This stuff right here, I literally put it in the microwave for 5 minutes just to make it dry so that we could see the difference. So I'm going to take all 4 bags of this sand, stick it out on a tarp in the sun, and let the sun dry it out as much as I possibly can before I mix it together with my organic matter and then eventually stick it on the lawn. If you want to learn more about actually leveling your lawn, I've got a video right up here that goes into a lot more of the detail.